Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Ask the SCSA. Today we are going to be wrapping up our audit tool presentations with a presentation on the supplemental and optional sections of the audit tool. We have a lot of great information to share with you, so thanks so much for joining, and we'll just go into some housekeeping. So before we get into it, if this is your first time joining us on Zoom, we just ask that you enter all your questions into the Q&A feature on Zoom. It allows us to keep track of those questions, make sure we get to everyone's. We will be posting any applicable links or information in the chat feature on Zoom as well, so keep that open if you need any information. And if you're joining us from Facebook, we are also monitoring those questions, so you can comment on our live stream there as well. So I guess we'll get into it, and we'll start with a brief round of introductions. We'll start with Rick.
Hi, my name is Rick Rieger. I'm the Senior Safety Advisor based out of Regina.
Thanks, Rick. Steve?
Hi, Steve Waldmar. I'm a Safety Advisor out of the Regina office. My region is south of the #1 right now.
Thanks, Steve. And Kieran?
My name's Kieran Greening. I work out of the Saskatoon office, and I currently deal with a few different regions. So if you've been in Prince Albert, Macklin, Humboldt, and the greater Saskatoon area, you might have seen me around.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. And I guess without much further ado, Steve, I will hand it off to you.
All right, we'll just get some screen sharing going here. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final segment of our audit tool series, the supplemental and optional sections. If you'd like to follow along with your own copy of the audit tool, simply go to scsaonline.ca. Under the Resources tab, click on Documents, Forms, Legislation. Among many other great resources, you will see options for 3 versions of our audit tool: Self-Audit, Core Internal, and C-Core Internal. Any one of those will do for today's presentation. Supplemental Sections 1, 2, and 3. SS1, Physical Conditions. 2, Harassment Policy. 3, Occupational Health and Safety Committee or Representative. Supplemental sections are required for core and C-Core audits. These sections may differ from province to province. Start with the SS1, Physical Conditions. This is a core only section, so physical conditions will not be evaluated for the C-Core certification. All points in this section will be determined by observations by the auditor. This section accounts for 18 possible points on the core audit. SS 1.1, are lunchroom and sanitary facilities kept in a clean and hygienic condition? The auditor will observe these facilities to ensure their cleanliness. Examples of what the auditor will be looking for would be things like the overflowing garbage, clean tables and floors, and the cleanliness of your porta potties, stuff like that. 1.2, are lighting levels sufficient in all areas? Again, the auditor will observe work areas to ensure there is enough light for the workers to complete tasks in a safe manner. Workers must not be active in an area with insufficient lighting. 1.3, does ventilation control airborne contaminants and temperature extremes? The auditor will be looking for a mechanical ventilation system when there is a need to control major fumes and or dust. There should be a way to control temperature extremes indoors as well. Special attention will be paid to garages, work sheds, enclosed work areas, outdoor hoardings, etc. 1.4, do housekeeping practices reduce the potential for falls, trips, and fires? The auditor will look for general housekeeping on each site to ensure the potential for slips, trips, and falls is reduced. The auditor will also give special consideration to worker mobility in the event of an emergency. 1.5, are physical hazards identified and controlled? Observations on this point will be treated like a site inspection. The auditor will look for major hazards such as overhead storage of materials, handrails, ground conditions, storage of specialized PPE, etc. 1.6 and 1.7. Are there sufficient entrances, exits, including emergency exits provided? And are all exits clearly marked and kept clear? The auditor must observe that there is a sufficient exits at all locations during the audit. All exit signs must be visible on approach to the exit. Points will not be awarded if an exit is blocked or not clearly marked as such. SS2, the harassment policy. The harassment policy will be evaluated for core and C-core applicants. Having a harassment policy in the workplace is mandatory in Saskatchewan. This section accounts for 8 possible points on a core audit and 4 possible points on a C-core audit. 2.1. Is there a written harassment policy signed and dated by current senior management? There must be a policy statement for the prevention and control of harassment. 2.2. Are employees aware of the policy objectives? During core interviews, the auditor will ask employees and management about the harassment policy for the workplace. 2.3. Is the policy posted on all work sites? The harassment policy must be posted in an obvious location at each company facility and work site. If there's nowhere to post the policy, all employees must somehow have access to it at all times via an employee handbook, manual, or electronic device. 2.4. Does the policy and procedure conform to government standards? This includes the proper definition from the Saskatchewan Employment Act Procedures 3-1L and must also meet requirements under OH&S Regulation 36. SS3, the Occupational Health Committee or representative. The OHC section will be evaluated for core and C-core audits. This section accounts for 12 points on a core audit and 8 points on a C-core audit. Refer to SASACs and OH&S regulations for information on establishing of committees and designation of representatives, as well as the duties of each. .1. Is an occupational health committee or representative in place? The auditor will verify through documentation and interviews that a committee or representative is in place. 3.2. Are both managers and workers represented on the committee? This is a core-only question. The names of committee members must be posted. The auditor will look for this as well as ensure workers and management are represented in appropriate numbers. Employees will be asked during the interview if they know who their OHC worker or co-chair or representative is. 3.3. Are committee meetings held at least quarterly? Another core-only question. The auditor will verify through documentation and interviews that meetings are held at the minimum frequency. The committee must hold its first meeting within 2 weeks after being established, then hold 3 subsequent meetings at intervals not exceeding a month, and then finally start to hold regular meetings at intervals not exceeding 3 months. 3.4. Have the co-chairs or representative received training? The auditor will look for training records to verify that the committee co-chairs or the representative have received OHC training. This training involves understanding the roles and responsibilities, as well as workplace inspections and workplace incident investigations. 3.5. Are the meeting minutes posted? Another core only. The auditor will look for meeting minutes posted in an obvious area, accessible by all workers. 3.6. Are committee representative recommendations followed? Committee reports should indicate the recommendations that are made or and if appropriate actions have been taken. If the company chooses not to act as requested, then written and reasonable justification must be provided. Interviews will also be used to verify the recommendations are addressed. 3.7. Is the committee or representative fulfilling their legislative responsibilities? The auditor will refer to current Saskatchewan legislation to ensure fulfillment of legislative responsibilities. Core interviewees will be asked the purpose and activities of their OHC. And now we're on to the optional sections, 1, 2, and 3. 1, WCB Claims Management. 2, Environmental Protection Policy. And 3, Miscellaneous Programs. The programs listed here are recommended, but not required for core or C-core audit process. The auditors will not include these optional sections in the audit report or score. So if it's optional, why put it in? Well, there's definitely benefits to these sections being in your manual, starting with WCB Claims Management. Your company can benefit both the employer and the worker. Benefits for your worker could be things like helps recover following an injury and assists with return to normal activities, both at work and at home. It keeps involvement in the workplace by maintaining relationships with coworkers and helping to keep your work skills up to date. It helps you maintain psychosocial well-being, can reduce the impact an injury has on you, your family, and the community, can reduce financial uncertainty that is often caused by being away from the workplace. And once you're back under your employee's payroll, you can be able to earn your regular salary and continue to accrue vacation time and make contributions to EI, CPP, company pension, and other plans provided by your workplace. The benefits to an employer. It retains valued and experienced employees, reduces costs associated with training and recruiting replacement staff, helps maintain productivity and team dynamics, improves workplace morale, reduces the cost of injuries, and it helps employers meet legal requirements related to human rights and WCB reemployment legislation. To learn more on the SCSA, the SCSA has an instructor-led online training course that focuses on understanding WCB legislation, how to effectively manage an injury claim, and modified work and return to work programs. Environmental protection policy. The benefits of an environmental policy include helping to stay within the law, keeping employees informed about the environmental roles and responsibilities, improving cost control, reducing incidences that result in liability, conserving raw materials and energy, improving your monitoring and environmental impacts, and by demonstrating commitment to environmental management, you can develop positive relationships with investors, insurers, customers, suppliers, regulators, and the local community. This in turn can lead to an improved company image and financial benefits. The OP3, the miscellaneous programs. If the company wishes to include anything else, such as a system to pre-qualify subcontractors or a recognition programs for safety, it will be found here. And that concludes the final segment of our audit tools series. As always, our advisors are here to help your company through the entire core and C-core process. Just go to www.scsaonline.ca, click on the contact tab to contact an advisor or our office. Or call our office at 306-525-0175. Thank you. A little bit of a short one today, guys, but that kind of wraps up our whole audit tool segment. So for those of you that have followed along throughout, yeah, I'm glad to finally be done it. And I hope you guys all learned a few things about the whole the audit tool and audit what the auditors are looking for to help your company stay within the safety parameters.
Yeah, I know the tool can be pretty overwhelming, so obviously we had to break it up into a few different presentations to make sure we didn't flood everyone with information, but no, that was really good, and we already have some questions coming in, Steve, so maybe I'll kind of jump into it here. So the first question actually is, I have a painting company and I was wondering if opening windows is good enough for ventilation.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, like, that's for a company, probably not. You're going to be doing more high demand stuff as far as painting goes. To answer that without knowing what you're using to paint, where you're painting, that's a tough question to answer. But I would say, you know, you work inside a house, you think everything's good, and then somebody from outside comes in and you can smell it instantly. I would venture to say no, but I don't know the dynamics of your situation.
Yeah, I think too, like that, like you're saying, Steve, or mentioning, that's a very specific question without knowing more of the details. It's tough for us to give an accurate recommendation. But when it comes to recommendations, typically you're not just relying on the opening of windows to properly ventilate. Obviously it helps, but there's so many other factors depending on the type of paint being used and how potent it is and that sort of thing. So I was going to mention, even before we got into these questions, it was important what you mentioned at the end of the presentation, Steve, was if companies do have any further questions when it comes to the audit tool or preparing themselves for an external audit or even internal questions or internal audit questions, best thing to do is to contact us. Advisory services have been working throughout this whole time, just in a different manner. So we're looking at helping companies out the best we can, and especially with this new way of auditing where we're doing the remote audits. I had the opportunity last week to do a remote audit with a company, and it was actually a really interesting and good experience. I felt for us as an association, or as me personally as an auditor, and even for the company, the feedback that I received afterwards was very positive. Just again, with that uncertainty, never having done that process before and unsure as to how it would actually play out and if everything would work, it went really well. So I guess what I'm getting at is, if you do have those specific questions when it comes to preparing for your audit, please don't hesitate to contact us. So a lot of companies will get into hypothetical and specifics, not something that we can necessarily answer always during these webinars, but something that we can work with companies to help them answer as they're preparing specifically for their own audits. Always remember that the companies that are writing the procedures and practices and getting into developing their own health and safety program, it's best when it comes from them. So that's always my recommendation is, you know, it just has that much more value if you have that ownership of your program. Make it applicable to your company and what it is that you do. So please don't hesitate to contact us if you do have those specific questions, and we can work with you on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah, and just to go even further than that, Rick, yeah, like just any apprehensions. You know, we're talking about site observations. Like at this time, we're not on site. The auditors aren't on site, so it's a new method of observations and stuff like that. And for any of these apprehensions that you have, or any run-throughs that you want to go through, or pre-audits, the advisors are here to help you with that. Even with the learning teams, and then doing, you know, pre-audit checks, and we can do observations, because, you know, we're not there on your site, so it's having that extra set of eyes, and, you know, especially looking for the things that we're looking for can definitely be beneficial. So it helps you learn the new methods. It helps you by having a set of eyes looking at your site, that sort of things. It eliminates that apprehension. So yeah, definitely welcome to touch base. And then as far as needing Teams or Zoom or anything like that, that's your starter point is definitely something that we can help you with and get you over that hump.
Yeah, you're right, because there is a lot of apprehension when it comes to sometimes, especially people with technology, and it is something new to them. The whole process of doing it remotely is new to them, and there probably is a lot of questions. Even as an auditor, I wasn't entirely sure how it was going to play out until I went through the process. Once I did it, it's like, oh wow, like that worked even much better than I maybe thought that it would. So even specifically the site observations, before when I used to do observations during an audit, I would be talking to the people leading me through the tour of their facility or the site visits and that sort of thing, but not as much direct communication as to specifically necessarily what I'm looking for. Whereas now, when we're not actually physically on site, I had better communication with the person who had the phone, who had the camera. You know, can I look at this more specifically or for a longer period of time? What else is going on site? Rather than me physically being able to look, they're now almost my set of eyes. So I have to give them the instructions as to where to point the camera, what I'm specifically looking for. So even things in your presentation where you showed the safety board that had everything posted. So I would go through this individual and say, okay, I'm going to need to take a look at your safety board. Maybe that's a good place where we start. So he would show me what they had posted. And if there wasn't anything that he went over, such as maybe the harassment policy, it's like, okay, I didn't see the harassment policy as you were going through everything. Where's the harassment policy posted? Can I take a look at the signature, see who signed it, when was the date that it was signed, and everything like that. So it's a little bit better communication almost with them during those observations, where they know what you're looking for too. So it almost doesn't leave it as open-ended or where they're wondering what it is that I'm looking for, because I'm having that conversation with them throughout the process.
You know, it's you almost forget how new this is. Like in some ways we're, you know, it's like, oh geez, you know, we feel like we've been working at home and we've learned this technology really well, but you know, that was, you know, middle of March. So you think that long ago, but you know, then it takes a while to build up these new systems and put that in place. So yeah, we understand how new this is and definitely the apprehension. So yes, definitely call us.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I don't think you need to have like any special account. Like you don't have to pay for a Teams account or pay for a Zoom account in order to use them. So, you know, you don't have to think, okay, well now I have to go out and get a whole bunch of new technology or pay for some new subscriptions or whatever, but you can just use them. So, but that was a really good discussion, and we'll get into, there's a lot more questions coming in now actually. Oh wait. You really stirred the pot, Steve. I have a big shop with lots of doors that go outside. Do I need to put signs up at all the doors or just the emergency exit?
There would need to be adequate amount of ways for your company to get out. Now, if it's tons and tons of doors, they don't all have to be determined as your exit and entry. There has to be a sufficient amount. So when you're picking your doors, think about what's outside of them, right? Like where your muster points are, stuff like that. And then, you know, each direction of the building, stuff like that. So, you know, there's no set requirement as to how many doors, you know, like, you know, you don't have to definitely have one on every door, but definitely when you're putting that exit on there, make sure it's in good walkways that have adequate access. It's not in your work areas, right? Because I'm guessing in a shop, you're thinking about the big overhead doors, probably not one that needs an entrance on it. Like what's the ease of opening that door? What's the ease of getting to that door? Those would be what I was thinking about if I was putting up my exit signs.
Right. And I would say too, with inside of a shop, those doors are like, they're not meant for people to go in and out of. I mean, people do, but I mean, you could have equipment parked there in front of the door, so it might not be accessible. Like Steve said, those overhead doors, if they're manual, they're not always easy to open. So I don't think it needs, like, don't really think of those as your emergency escape route, you need to have, you know, a couple designated areas that are always kept clear, that are always marked and clearly visible and lit. And those are your exit routes, right? You don't have to mark every door and window as an exit route necessarily, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure too if the question is more referring to if there has to be a sign on every door. I don't know if that was what the question was necessarily asking. And sometimes I've had companies ask that. And I said for the time that it takes to put up a sign, it's probably worth it, because you don't want to get into the situation of an audit where the question is asking, are all exits marked? I think that's, yeah, are all exits clearly marked? So is that meaning on the sign with signs posted? Is that meaning on exit routes? You know, so don't, what I tell companies is don't have that questionable. If it's a matter of just putting a sign over top of every door, and like Steve, you mentioned, like the emergency exits that have that that emergency lighting, you're seeing that quite often. You know, that's not necessary for every door, but just if it's a sign or a way of posting it or marking it, it's probably worth you doing that so it doesn't become a question and then the company's trying to challenge it or argue that point when it comes to a closeout, when it's not worth the hassle almost. Just you can easily remedy that, have that in place, and it takes less time to almost mark it than it is like arguing it. So, you know, that's the recommendations that I typically give companies too. And when it comes to anything within the audit, a lot of times companies will try to cut corners, or not a lot of times, but sometimes they will, and spend more time trying to justify why they didn't do it, when it's like, just it makes more sense just to do it and have that in place.
That's a really good point, Rick.
Another thing to consider a little bit too is it just the workers that you're thinking about? Like, you have customers coming in and out, like you might have different reasons to have different doors in your building, right? Like if you have customers come to drop a vehicle off, like you mentioned it's a shop or something like that. So just keep all those things in mind. It's beyond the worker as well, right? And then entry, like everyone thinks exit, getting out of the building, but you know, you open up the wrong door and you bump into something because you don't see what's inside the shop at that time. And, you know, and going back to that physical conditions that we talked about with overhead hazards and stuff like that. So just make sure, you know, customers have a different entrance, especially if you require PPE in one area and not another. Another good thing to post on different doors is workers only, PPE required, or maybe, you know, customer entrance, that sort of stuff. So lots of different things to consider when you're marking your exits and entrances.
Those are some great points, guys. I'm going to jump right into more questions here, though, because they're just coming in. They're flying in. So the next question is actually asking about posting, which you just talked about, Steve. So I have a few workers that do a bunch of small jobs throughout the day. How do I post the policy on every site? This sounds like it cannot be done. Well, I think we have a solution for you.
Again, it's posting, but it's access to, like we mentioned in the presentation, that can happen on your phone. You can send your guys emails. Like if you're thinking in regards to like a committee meeting, yeah, like if you have a spot to post this stuff that's easily accessible, you can also email this around your company, or you can make sure that it gets put on their phone. So it has more to do with the accessibility of it, and it kind of goes back to almost every section we've done, not just this last couple sections. If you've noticed a common theme in a lot of these questions, are workers aware? Are workers aware? It's more than once in every single part along this course. They're going to be asked in interviews. We're going to be looking for it in documentation. Worker knowledge in regards to your policy is huge. So does it have to be written on a wall every time they turn around? No, but they do need access to the information surrounding your safety in all regards.
Yes, and I believe, and Rick can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the questions that pertain to like posting policies or putting them up, I believe it says, is the policy or whatever it is posted or made readily available, right? So you don't have to actually have a physical spot to hang it up on a wall. As long as the workers can access it, like Steve said, on their phones. If you have a copy of your safety manual with all your policies in a binder in your truck, that works as well. So there's always ways to make it work. So the next question is actually about the worker rep. So this person, they just started with a company this week. And because he's taken a few of the SCSA courses, his boss has told him he is now the worker rep. Can he do this?
So you said worker rep. So I'm going to assume that you would be the co-chair, not the representative in this case. You would need, as a worker, you need to be voted in. So it's not up to the employer to decide on the worker rep. The worker rep is just that. They're representing the workers in health and safety in your company. So the workers need a voice. That voice starts with a vote for that rep to be in there. So in regards to that, no, like, you know, it's deciding on who the rep because of training, no, it doesn't fly. You need to have that vote amongst the other workers.
Steve, I think in this instance, they're referring to like a representative. So if you have 5 to 9 employees in Saskatchewan, in which case they can say you are going to be the representative, but only if all the other workers in the company agree. So basically it's a similar voting process, but if you have taken the training and he sent you to OHC level 1, level 2, he can say you are going to be the worker rep pending everyone accepting. And as most people normally would accept that, that would fly. So that's what's stated in the Saskatchewan Act.
Yeah, and I think this was a good example of it. There's two, yeah, Kieran, you're talking about a rep in the case of there being no committee. So between that 5 and 9 workers, then there being a rep, and then they could be appointed by the employer, just as you mentioned. And then you have the representative to the workers, like Steve was talking about, and then where the workers vote that person in. So 2 different scenarios, but yeah, it gets a little bit tricky when it comes to occupational health committee and representation and the reps and all that sort of thing. So a lot of legislation applies to those specific areas. That's why both Steve and Karen, you already talked about training. It's important to have that applicable training, which comes through in the audit tool, making sure that the representative or the co-chairs have the appropriate training. And there's a lot of situational stuff that comes up when it is dealing with that OHC. And there's a very important reason for having that committee or that representative in place. And those positions hold a lot of weight and value. So you want to make sure that you're doing that properly, that you're following legislation, that you have everything in place that you need to. And again, those are those questions, like we said at the beginning, even like when it comes to the ventilation questions, there can be very specific questions depending on company size, where companies are located, how they operate their company, and then trying to determine how it is that legislation fits for those companies. So a lot of factors involved when it comes to the OHCs. So thanks for both of you guys' point of view there.
Yeah, there is a lot of particulars, and yeah, you definitely need all the details to kind of give you a solid answer on how to set your own company up. But the next question is another committee question, actually, or a representative question, I guess. How often does the OHC representative have to meet with the employer?
There's actually, all it says is that regular meetings with the employer. It doesn't actually have a specific time like the OHC committee does in regards to, you know, your 2 weeks with starting, your 1 month, and then 3 months. Your meeting of your representative to your with the employer is just says at regular intervals. So I invite you to use kind of the same sort of policies that the committee would have, but it doesn't specified the same way.
Yeah, I believe with the committee, or sorry, with the representative rather, you can kind of set up your own schedule. I know with the companies I've worked with, oftentimes it actually kind of works for them to meet quarterly, 4 times a year. It's not very often. And they discuss all sort of the same things that the committee would discuss. So incidents, issues that have come up. So find what works for you. I find though, if you are kind of on that large size company verge, it's probably a good idea to just meet quarterly like a committee would.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to keep, oh, sorry, Karen. It's nice to keep that consistency, even with a company I was just auditing here recently. They were at that point where they had between that 5 and 9, so they could have gone down to having just the rep. But in order to maintain that consistency and not really lose focus and have everything running as it was, they're a company that often goes above the 10 or more. So they weren't cutting corners. They were just sticking with, we're still going to maintain our committee and run meetings on a quarterly basis, and then just keep that going, because at any time, they were interviewing again for new workers. They might go again to that 10 or more. They were currently at less, and they just want to maintain that and keep that going. So again, like we often talk about with legislation, those are minimum requirements. So when you're talking about having a representative, that's a minimum requirement. So to go a little bit above and beyond that, there's definitely nothing wrong with that. Sorry, Karen, to cut you off there.
Yeah, anytime you set a deadline for yourself, you're far more likely to do it. If you say we'll just have them throughout the year, like the whole year could go by and you might not actually have one. So if you set out quarterly or however often, it's much more likely to actually happen.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, Karen. And the same goes for, I know I've worked with companies who have a lot of subcontractors, so they might only have, 1 or 2, 3 people throughout the year, and then in their busy season get up to like 60 people. And so, it's easier for them to have a committee and just sort of maintain that, so that during those busy times, they just have it, it's there, it's established. They're not trying to pick up and then get rid of it and pick up and get rid of it when they need it. So just consistency makes a lot of things easier, I think. We're kind of jumping around. There's a few different themes here. Critical task list. So this person just created it. Do I need a safe work policy and procedure to go with each one? I think, well, I mean, maybe he meant policy or practice, but does anybody want to try and give him a good answer?
Yeah, so your critical task list, you need a procedure for. That's the recommend. Now, should you have a practice too? Yeah, it's a critical task list, but the requirement is a procedure, like a step-by-step. This is how we're gonna do it. Your practices are great things to have too. It's your do's and don'ts a little bit, but for anything on your critical task list, a procedure is required.
On the due diligence side of it too, Steve, so if you think about the word due diligence, it's anything you can do under your control to influence or to make sure you're following the law. So if you outline a critical task as something that's overly dangerous, let's say you have an incident where the guy falls off the roof and there's a practice and a procedure that could have been written, but you only write a procedure. Let's say that practice includes some important information that doesn't fall directly in that procedure. So now, have you done everything you can? If you think about it, you haven't. So in the eyes of strictly due diligence, so that ominous word or couple of words, we have to make sure that as companies, we do the things that we have to under the law to ensure that we're doing everything we can possible.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as the policy, just because the question does actually use that particular word, CORE doesn't require you to have a policy about critical tasks, just that you identify which tasks are critical for you and that you have those practices and procedures in place. I have seen companies with policies for critical tasks. And so those things will include things like, some companies might say, if we're going to be doing a critical task, then it's required that a manager sign off on the hazard assessment that day. So some companies have a policy like that in place because they want to make sure that those things are happening. before a critical task takes place. But an actual worded policy isn't necessarily a requirement, just having those detailed procedures and practices for those critical tasks.
And companies need to remember too that they're the ones that, again, are taking ownership or should be taking ownership for their safety program. So they should really be taking a good look at, you know, what are those procedures that they would consider to be critical, because sometimes I'm seeing companies maybe not spending as much time or effort as they should, like really taking an inventory of what it is that the company does and making sure that those are the ones that we consider to be critical. They either have a higher risk, maybe they've caused an accident or an injury in the past, or if not done as they should be, really have that potential to cause some serious injury. So sometimes you'll see companies just kind of going over and not really maybe spending as much time as they should, because that's a really important part of your health and safety program. Is this is what we do on a regular basis, but these are the procedures that we do where we really need to pay particular attention to because they are a higher risk, and these are what we deem to be considered critical. As auditors or as advisors coming in, we may not necessarily have that insight that the company has, because they're the ones that do these tasks within their company. So that's something that a company really has to determine on their own. We can assist and help with that, but again, we're kind of from the outside looking in. We're not that involved with these companies.
We can't be experts in every subject. Like all of our advisors are experts in some subjects. We've got welders and carpenters and all sorts of subject expert. I'm not even gonna go there. Just too many words for today. But going into the next few questions here, and we touched on this a little bit here. If I do the optional stuff in the audit, will I be rewarded with extra points? Will this help my core if I'm close to failing?
No. This is there's the auditors won't be awarding any points. It's not. It's like I said. It's purely optional. You know, it's good to have an environmental policy, right? You know, you think about those spills. There's stuff in legislation regarding environmental. There's stuff in legislation regarding WCB. So it's highly recommended to have this stuff in there. But as far as what the auditors will be putting check marks and points down for, no, it's not going to help you, and it's not going to get you over that goal line as far as the determination of your core certification.
Right. The other thing that I was just reminded of with that question is that, you know, with core, you have your overall score, which has to be above 80 to pass, right? And but you can also fail in certain sections, and so we can do what's called a limited scope audit if you fail in one section but you get over 80 overall. So but yeah, like Steve said, those supplemental and optional sections, they don't give you, there's no extra points in core for anything. It's just you got to meet the minimum standard or you don't, kind of thing. So this person asks, they're worried about their audit that's coming up. Can advisors still conduct core pre-audit checks?
We certainly can. So it's a different process than normally would be. We can't physically sit down with you in a location, but we can go over Teams and look at documentation, different filled out things. We can also do a similar format to how auditors on site do observations. So long as it's okay with the general contractor and everyone's aware of it on site, if you were to bring us virtually with a phone or tablet or device of some sort, we could see stuff. It might not be as 100% thorough, but the advisors were working hard to ensure that we can be thorough through this proxy. We want to ensure we give the members the best possible information as well as observations. So
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, no, I know that's a good question, and we've been discussing lots about getting back out on site eventually. But in the meantime, we're just gonna do the digital thing for now. So the next question is about supervisors. So does a supervisor need to be on site at all times? If I set 2 qualified workers up for a concrete pour, can I head to another site to get another crew set up? Lots of hypotheticals today, guys.
Well, there's some legislative responsibilities there that people need to take into consideration, and then the audit looks at that as well. So we also teach this in our courses, or in some of our courses. We touch on it specifically, our Leadership for Safety Excellence course, where we talk about the importance of supervisors to be trained properly and what it is that they do and their duties and responsibilities and all that sort of stuff. So again, without knowing exactly what those workers have for training, it's difficult to answer that. And also too, what we teach in our courses or in training, that just because you don't have supervisor in your title doesn't necessarily mean you're not a supervisor. So speaking from an audit point of view, if an individual was a supervisor, he's getting 2 guys set up for a pour, and then he goes to a different site. Because there's 2 workers at that particular site, one of them needs to be considered a supervisor, whether or not they're officially considered one or not. So say even if OH&S were to come on site, like an OHO, they would say, well, who's answering the questions here, or who's supervising this? And then whoever is, that person then needs to be properly trained.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, are you leaving 2 workers on that site that you haven't observed do their task? Have these workers been your workers for 5 years and proved themselves to be competent in what you left them there to do? These are all determining factors in whether you'd leave your guys doing what they're doing. Do they have supervisor in their name? Maybe not, right? Maybe they're just your workers. But if they're not qualified and competent to do what you left them there to do, then you shouldn't have left them there to do it. If you've deemed them competent through observation and training, and that training can be done by you depending on what it is, right? Like it's, but they need to be deemed competent to be able to be left there, right? So you don't just leave 2 green guys. So to determine whether they should or shouldn't, yeah, it comes down to knowledge, experience, and training.
Yeah, and I mean, this gentleman, or I'm assuming could be anybody, but they mentioned specifically 2 qualified workers. So I know in our definitions that we talk about a lot, qualified generally means that they're certified to do something, and they're concrete guys, so maybe they're qualified to pour concrete and tie rebar and build forms. But that might not necessarily make them competent to supervise, oversee, or direct the work of someone else. So like Rick and Steve both said, being a supervisor is different than being qualified to operate a concrete pump or whatever, right? So you just got to make sure that the guys that are there, that are working alone, that they have somebody in charge, somebody knows what to do, who to contact, all those things. So the next question that's coming in is one that we've had probably on every one of these, and it's, when will WMIS be available? So we are working on that. I don't think anybody else knows much more. So I want to say sometime next month maybe we'll have it open, but don't take my word as hard and fast.
Just with that, when it is open, they will be sending out an email. So I invite you to get, if you are really looking forward to getting this done, get your name and email on that list, so you'll know as soon as it's ready. Those emails will start coming out, and then you can start finding your time to book a spot into that.
And just to mention as well, like, we have been giving extensions to people who are in the like in the audit process that maybe have an expired WMIS. So because we know we don't have the course running right now, we're making exceptions for those situations. So if you're in a situation like that where WMIS is what's holding you back, just contact our office and talk to the admin staff there, and they will be able to sort of tell you what your options are and how soon we'll hopefully get this done for you guys. Okay, so do I need to buy any special equipment for remote auditing?
Well, it depends what you mean by special equipment. If you're still using a flip phone and don't have a computer, then you might need something. I would suspect that if you have a company, you've got a computer, most likely a smartphone, which most people seem to have, and that's all you need. The programs that go with it, like if you're on Zoom, anybody watching right now has the equipment necessary to do the audit. Basically, we use Teams, but it's very similar. They're going to do that. It's going to be the same thing where you just accept an invite, and your phone or computer will do the rest for you and get you set up.
Yeah, the auditors should be contacting the companies a little bit more ahead of time than what we typically do. So roughly around that 3 weeks or so. It kind of depends, especially on auditors. We're quite busy at this point right now, but we try to do a bit of a practice run on Teams a week before the audit too, just to make sure that people understand how it works, make sure that they have the proper technology to make it work. And then that's, again, like Steve, you were mentioning, that's how we do the opening meeting then through Teams, through the laptop typically, but it could be through a phone, I guess, too. And then the observations are, typically through a phone. So it works both ways, either on a laptop, a phone, or a tablet, or whatever. And like I said, it works pretty slick. It works pretty good. I guess the thing to keep in mind though too is you have to have some sort of internet connection or what. So sometimes that could be a little bit hit and miss in some areas where people are working, but that's one thing to keep in mind and to consider, and maybe even try out ahead of time, because we're still wanting to have those site observations. We're not doing them in person, but we still want to be able to actually see the physical side of work that's going on. So it's important that there has to be some sort of an internet connection or ability to do that.
Absolutely. And yeah, just to kind of reiterate that, if you're not sure how this is going to work, that's what the advisors are here for. So give us a shout, and we'll sit down with you and try out all this software and make sure it's going to work and make sure it's going to function the way you want it to, so that you're ready for an audit. You're never going to be thrown into the deep end. So we only have a few more questions, or a few more minutes left, and I have a lot more questions. Trying to kind of maybe combine a few here. There's quite a few people are asking about manuals. So can I pick one up at your office? Can I download one from your website? Where do I buy a manual? So maybe Kieran or Steve, I mean, any one of you could sort of explain the manual development process and what it is and what it isn't.
Our manual development program isn't just a pick up a manual and go sort of thing. So we'll sit down with you and we want to get to know your company and understand what it is you do. So before I actually build a manual, I'll talk to the company, make sure that we have a manual that's going to fit your scope. So if that does happen, and you do have a manual or a company that will fit in the scope of what we want to do, we can customize it through what's called a manual build process. We have a document builder where we take and build the manual for a company. So there's some prerequisite stuff. We want you to be able to understand what kind of components go into a safety manual, as well as how to make sure that it's going to work. So beforehand, there's the prerequisite is to be registered for one of our flagship programs, so CCOR or CORE, which we've been talking about this whole time, and then to have done the safety management course, which is all the ideas that go into how a manual works and what it's all about, and then safety auditor, which is, like I said, teaching you how to make sure it works, and it's been the topic of our webinars. So once you meet those 3 requirements, we can sit down and create a manual that's going to work for your company, that has frequencies for toolbox meetings, inspections, hazard assessments, and stuff that's going to be achievable. Because the first iteration of any safety program is never going to be perfect. 15 iterations down the road, it still might not be perfect. The idea is always continuous improvement, and that's the idea of the manual. So potentially, if you're looking for a quick fix or a one-time investment to fulfill the rest of your life, it's not going to be that. What you're looking at is an investment in your own company, and you're looking at putting in time. So nothing's ever free, but this is as close as it gets.
Yeah, and it's just to kind of touch on that though, it is free from us if you're a member and you're going through these programs, core, C-Core. There is no charge for advisory services. So we will build you, and we'll work with you to build the manual, make it personalized to your company, make sure it's going to work for you guys, and there is no charge for that. So a few more questions before we're almost done here. So somebody asked, can I get the supervisor training you were talking about from you guys?
You betcha. It's our Leadership for Safety Excellence. So it goes over investigations, reporting, and inspections in detail, as well as just some other good components where you learn to use the acts and regulations to be able to find legislation. Because as we know, they're books written by lawyers and they're for lawyers. So if we can kind of get in their heads and figure out how to read the books, that's also included in the class.
Thanks so much, Kieran. I got another question. So this person asked, we have to wear all the PPE that is required. And then the other day, a delivery girl showed up on site in shorts and flip-flops. Does she need to be in PPE to come on our site, even if she isn't building anything?
Short answer is yes. She's coming onto a construction site. Minimum requirements are hard hat and safety boots. Nobody should be allowed to get onto that site without it. So if you're a delivery company, anything that you're ordering to site, you should typically be forewarning them that when they get to site, they should have this requirements. Yeah, otherwise, I would highly recommend that delivery driver doesn't get out of the vehicle once on site, and you unload or whatever you got to do.
Yeah, a common practice is to include them in a subcontractor and a site orientation. So if you're going to get lots of stuff delivered from the same company, it's good to have them understand the risks, the hazards, and stuff on site. That way, if there is an incident that happens and they do come onto site 3 days after an orientation, you're not going to see the full liability or potential litigation due to an incident happening on your site.
Yeah, basically, I mean, the law applies to everybody equally, right? And you just don't want people running around on site in flip-flops. I know I had to chase a couple homeowners out of some condo buildings back in the day who thought they wanted to come onto site and see how their condo was going in the framing stages. And they were, you know, in flip-flops and their street clothes kind of thing. And if that person were to get injured, fall down a shaft, trip on a board with nails in it, whatever, like your company could be liable, right? So you do want to make sure people aren't coming and going on site that don't have the required PPE. We did have a few more questions that I didn't get to everybody. It is 1 o'clock now, so we'll have to wrap it up. But what I will do is pass these questions on to our Thursday crew, who will be doing a presentation this Thursday, 12 to 1 again. So join us if you can for that, and we'll get to the rest of these questions. In the meantime, thanks so much for joining us today, and I hope everyone stays safe and stays healthy, and we will see you in a couple days.